They said it as a joke at first. Filipino nurses? They're everywhere. Some laughed like it was strange that so many of them left home just to care for strangers in countries far away. But what they didn't know was that behind every uniform, behind every calm smile and gentle, "Are you okay?" there was a story of courage, sacrifice, and quiet strength. They laughed until one day the world realized hospitals couldn't work without them. It started decades ago, back when the Philippines was rebuilding after hard times. Jobs were scarce, and dreams seemed out of reach for many families. Nursing became a path, a ticket to a better life, a way to help both others and their own. Young Filipinos studied day and night, often in crowded classrooms and small clinics, learning how to heal people they had never met. Their parents sold land, jewelry, anything to send them to school. The dream was not just about money. It was about dignity, about proving that kindness, care, and skill could open doors that language and status could not. When they left home, most of them carried more than luggage. They carried expectations. They carried love letters from their families, dried mangoes in their bags, and prayers whispered at the airport. They cried quietly on flights, hiding tears from strangers. Many were scared, but they kept smiling. Because that's what Filipinos do. They smile through fear. The early days abroad were tough. Some faced racism, others mockery. They were called cheap labor, the help, or even imports. Some doctors and patients looked down on them just because of their accent or brown skin. But while others judged, Filipino nurses showed up, on time, every day, no matter how tired. They worked extra shifts, covered for others, learned new systems, learned new languages, and earned respect, not through words, but through action. Slowly, hospitals began to notice. The Filipino nurses weren't just hardworking, they were excellent. Patients loved them for their warmth, their empathy, their patience. When everyone else was too busy, it was the Filipino nurse who held a patient's hand. When a lonely old woman in London cried at night, it was a Filipino nurse who sat by her side. When hospitals in the US ran out of staff, Filipino nurses stepped up. When the pandemic came and the world was afraid to breathe near one another, they didn't run away. They ran toward danger. Many paid the ultimate price, but even then, more followed in their footsteps, knowing the risks, knowing the calling. It wasn't just a job anymore. It became a lifeline between nations. Soon, countries began competing to hire Filipino nurses. The same nations that once mocked them were now depending on them. The US, the UK, Canada, Germany, Japan, all needing that same gentle touch, that discipline, that heart. The Filipino nurse had become a symbol of care itself. Behind the masks and scrubs, though, life wasn't easy. Many missed weddings, birthdays, funerals. They watched their children grow up through video calls. Some cried alone in staff rooms, missing home-cooked meals and Tagalog jokes. Yet, when the call came for another patient, they wiped their tears and went back to work. Because duty came first. Because healing others was their mission. They were tired, but they never showed it. They were homesick, but they never quit. And somehow, that quiet endurance became their greatest strength. When hospitals faced crisis after crisis, it was the Filipinos who kept things running. They stayed calm when machines broke. They worked double when others resigned. They smiled even when their hearts were breaking. And one day, the world started to see. The same people who were once laughed at were now being honored. Awards, documentaries, and global tributes began to appear. News anchors said it out loud. We cannot imagine our hospitals without Filipino nurses. The laughter stopped, replaced by gratitude. Still, back home, the story remained bittersweet. For every nurse who succeeded abroad, There was a family waiting, a mother proud but lonely, a child who knew love only through gifts and voice notes. The price of success was often distance, but ask any Filipino nurse if it was worth it, and you'll hear the same quiet answer. If it means helping others, yes. Their strength isn't loud. It's in the patience to handle pain every day, the calm to face emergencies, the heart to care even for those who don't say thank you. It's in their laughter during coffee breaks, in the way they decorate hospital lockers with photos of family and the Philippine flag. It's in their unity, their ability to turn hardship into humor, exhaustion into excellence. And maybe that's why the world noticed. Because when everything falls apart, the Filipino nurse doesn't panic. They adjust the mask, fix the IV, whisper a prayer, and keep going. Some say they were born to care, but maybe they chose it, chose to heal even when they're hurting, chose to stay kind in a world that sometimes forgets kindness, chose to represent their country not with flags, but with compassion. Today, if you walk into any hospital in America, the UK, or the Middle East, you'll find them there. Filipino nurses leading teams, saving lives, and still smiling. Their accents echo through hallways that once doubted them. Their presence brings comfort in rooms filled with fear. And quietly, without demanding praise, they remind the world that greatness doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to show up when it matters most. They didn't just fill hospital roles. They filled hearts too. Doctors began to trust them more than anyone else. Patients started asking for them by name. Their laughter brightened night shifts. Their teamwork made impossible workloads bearable. They were the soul of the hospital, steady, caring, and quietly powerful. In America, a head nurse once said, "If all the Filipino nurses called in sick for one day, the whole system would collapse." It sounded like an exaggeration, but it wasn't. Hospitals across continents depended on them, and not just for their skills, but for their spirit. During long nights when alarms wouldn't stop beeping, when chaos filled the ward, when everyone was exhausted, the Filipino nurses kept the calm alive. They sang softly to patients, cracked jokes in the break room, brought food for coworkers, and created family where there was none. They reminded everyone that hospitals weren't just about medicine. They were about humanity. Still, behind their calm faces were stories the world rarely saw. The nurse who missed her father's funeral because her visa hadn't been approved. The nurse who spent Christmas alone in a dorm, scrolling through old photos of family dinners. The nurse who sent her entire paycheck home, leaving almost nothing for herself. The nurse who was mocked for her accent until the same doctor who laughed asked her to lead a team. Every story carried both heartbreak and pride. But no matter what, they stood tall. Because they knew the truth. The world might not always respect where you're from, but it will always respect what you do. And Filipino nurses proved that every single day. During the pandemic, when fear froze nations, it was Filipino nurses who became the front line of the front lines. They worked through panic, through shortage of equipment, through the sound of ventilators and sirens. Many never made it home. Yet, even as they mourned their fallen colleagues, others stepped forward. They didn't ask for medals. They asked for strength. Because that's who they were, silent heroes in scrubs. When the crisis ended, governments across the world acknowledged their sacrifice. But even then, the Filipino nurse went back to work quietly, just as before. They didn't demand headlines. They simply said, "It's our job." And yet, for millions watching from home, they became symbols of what true service means. They showed the world that compassion has no borders, that dignity doesn't come from wealth or power, but from kindness. Some people once said, "It's just nursing." But Filipino nurses made it clear. It's never just nursing. It's holding a stranger's hand through pain. It's comforting families who have lost everything. It's standing between life and death with faith, hope, and heart. And that's something money or rank could never measure. Today, new generations continue the legacy. Young Filipinos dream not just of leaving, but of serving. They see those who came before, the ones who turned mockery into respect. And they walk the same path with pride. They study hard, take English exams, train for long shifts abroad, and carry their families' dreams once again. Each flight out of Manila is not just a departure. It's a continuation of a story that began decades ago. The story of how a small nation raised a global army of healers. The story of how kindness conquered prejudice. The story of how laughter turned to admiration. And even now, in hospitals across the world, that story continues. In every gentle smile, every whispered, "You'll be okay." Every quiet act of care that saves another life. So yes, they laughed once, but not anymore. Because now, when you think of care, you think of them. When you think of compassion, you see their faces. When you think of healing, you hear their voices. The Filipino nurses didn't just change hospitals, they changed how the world sees humanity itself. They reminded us that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear scrubs. They work through fatigue, through homesickness, through heartbreak, all for people they've never met. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about them. They love without boundaries. They serve without recognition. They endure without complaint. So the next time you walk into a hospital and see a Filipino nurse, remember, they are the reason the system still stands. They are the ones who turn doubt into dependence, laughter into loyalty, and fear into faith. They are the reason millions live to tell their stories. And if there's one thing the world should never forget, it's that the Filipino nurse didn't just earn respect, they redefined it. Because when the world was at its weakest, they stayed strong. When others gave up, they kept showing up. When everything seemed lost, they brought hope. And hope, that's what keeps the world alive.